Yes, I'm going to talk about Wharton Esherick. He is the founder of the studio furniture movement in the United States. And another title that I often use is the Reluctant Woodworker, because it's not exactly what he was out to do, make furniture. He had a number of careers before that. He started as a painter, and he was educated academically. He went to what's now the University of the Arts and the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts. He was born in 1887 and died in 1970. Interestingly, he didn't start doing any woodworking until he was 33. He also had interest in dance, theater, music, literature, but the people that had those occupations were his friends. Theodore Dreiser, the writer, Sherwood Anderson, music. The conductor for the Philadelphia Orchestra was a friend, and he had a lot of people in the theater as well. One of the few jobs that he had was working for the Victor Talking Machine Company, which was located in Camden, New Jersey, right over the river from Philadelphia. And he just worked there for 1 year doing illustration. This is a rare example of his posters that he would do for them. And the Victor Talking Machine Company was huge. I saw an ad for it at that time. The manufacturing facility was, if you were to straighten it all out into one line, was 100 feet wide, 3 miles long. Huge. He did printmaking through the 20s. He did about 400 different block prints, which averaged about one a week, which is pretty significant, I think. And but it was also when he was starting to learn woodworking as well. So there's overlapping careers that he was engaged in. He lived in the farmland in what's called Paoli, Pennsylvania, which is northwest of Philadelphia by about 40 minutes. And this would be an example of his, farming around him. And he did prints of all different shapes and sizes. He also did book illustrations for art books, which were very popular in the 1920s. This one, obviously, a little bit more on the deco side. That's a linoleum print for a book he did called Tristram and Isolde, which was put out in 1930. Unfortunate timing of the Depression, 1929. So it sort of marked the end of his illustration career of doing the books. He went in a different direction. He would also not only do the illustrations for the books, but he would do a run of prints and sell the prints individually as well. These are examples of some of the books. The two on the right actually they're all limited edition books. And by art books, I mean they're numbered and they would be signed and beautifully bound. The one on the right, in 1927, Song of Solomon, I think one of his best, sold for $15, which was a lot of money back then. His paintings, kind of impressionist style. This would be from 1920, a trip he made to Fairhope, Alabama. And he also then started making his frames. And there was a relationship of the frames to the paintings. So here are pine trees, and so there's pine needles that are carved into the surface. And through the 20s, he was making frames. I would say early 20s, because he only made them for his paintings, and he stopped painting in around 23, 24, something like that. But here you can see a lot of different styles that he was exploring. The second one second one over from the right would be live oak leaves. So that would have been for a painting of the live oak tree. He really enjoyed sculpture, and he enjoyed sculpture more than he did furniture making. He ended up making a lot more furniture because he was selling furniture. That was the reason. This is a sculpture he made, or he did of a pose called Finale in 1929, and it was put on display at Hedgerow Theater, which was a theater nearby run by Jasper Dieter, who had previous connections with the Provincetown Players, if you are familiar with modern theater in the U.S. And significant is that this piece was sold to Helene Fisher, who would be one of his main patrons in the 1930s. Esherick did a lot for Hedgerow. This is a poster for Eugene O'Neill play, The Emperor Jones. This is a promotional photograph for Anne Harding, who was a very famous Hollywood actress in the early talkies. I'm reading a biography of her now. In 1930, she was making $6,000 a week. That's a lot of money. And this is, she studied with Jasper Dieter when Jasper was with the Provincetown Players, and also came to Hedgerow Theater to perform there as well. This is Anne Harding with a set of, a chess set made by Wharton Esherick. There's also some interesting connections of Esherick with Henry Varnum Poor, who so many similarities. They were born the same year, they died the same year. They both had a son named Peter, born in 1926. They both made furniture, they both did ceramics, really interesting stuff. And they also ornamented existing furniture. So this is a chest, the lower one is a chest by Esherick, ornamented by Esherick, and the upper one is a painted one by Henry Varnum Poor. Esherick had an association with the Gardner doing dance camps in the Adirondacks, and he made this, or had this table made, probably a refectory table for them, huge table, about 12 feet long, and he carved in these squares and rectangles into the top surface and had the people there listen to music and then do a drawing based on what they were hearing. And so these are some of the things that are carved into that top, and I think it's really fascinating. He was always trying to connect, music with his woodworking, dance with his woodworking, and trying to make that connection. Although this chair is dated 1926, it is by Esherick. It's a child's chair completed for his son Peter. Most likely was made in 1923 for his daughter Ruth, but he didn't get it done. So when the next one came along. So, and you can see the clear connection here with arts and crafts. Hedgerow, Rose Valley, Hedgerow is in Rose Valley, Pennsylvania, and that was a arts and crafts colony, so he was familiar with it. So there's three basic styles that Esherick explored. Some of them had shorter lives than others. This one had a very short life of what's called his literature phase, where he would carve imagery into the surfaces, and they kind of look like the block for a block print, so you see the trees carved into the back of the vertical surface in the center there. This is said to be the only piece of furniture that Esherick made himself. And I've learned a lot more about that subject, which I'll get to in a few minutes. But this is sort of like his journeyman's piece. It's all dovetailed together, all carved, very well made. But compared to some of the stuff that was being made shortly after that, or designed by him, it's on the simpler side. Another piece, a screen, folding screen that was purchased at then record-setting price to the Boston Museum of Fine Arts for $350,000, about 6 years ago. And walnut with ebony birds in it. So that would be one phase, and he decided that form should say it all, that he shouldn't have to embellish and make these pictures on the surfaces. Concurrent with that phase, he was doing this furniture, 1928, and this would be an example of his anthroposophical phase. Now, this appears to be cubist. You could easily make that connection, the kind of skewed perspective and so on. But there's a clear connection with Rudolf Steiner, who was the founder of anthroposophy, and Esherick had 12 books by Steiner. Esherick and his wife, I should say. They had 12 books. The thing that you might know about anthroposophy is the Waldorf schools. That seems to be the only carryover that a lot of people would know. And in Dornach, Switzerland, there's a complex of buildings, most of them still exist, featuring the Goetheanum, which is in the upper right here, and it was all made out of wood. This is the interior being carved. The whole thing was carved. And unfortunately, it was burned down by I think a disgruntled worker. 2 years after it was completed. But it was rebuilt again, but not all in wood like this. And what this did was it brought, in order to build the building, it took 4 years to do it. He needed to have all the carvers around. Skilled craftsmen come there and stay there. And they ended up staying beyond having the buildings being completed. And they became the resident woodworkers of Dornach, Switzerland. And I think that tradition still exists today. He wrote a book, Steiner, that is called Ways to a New Style in Architecture. And Esherick had a copy of this book. And there is Steiner with part of the model for the Goetheanum. And to give you an idea of that connection, if you look at these three pieces of furniture, I think you can see a connection in terms of style between them. One of them is done by Esherick, and two are anthroposophical woodworkers. So which one is it, Russell? Good. It's the one in the middle. Thanks, I owe you for that. So that's a cabinet that he did. And these anthroposophical woodworkers are featured in this book called Dornach Design. It's in German, but it's a great picture book. There's a section on Esherick too. I'm hoping that they translate it, but I would highly recommend that. It just gives you a kind of view into a period. Actually, it covers a lot of years, but it just features all the anthroposophical woodworkers. So that's the second style, and that went for about the 30s, and in particular for one client. But what he's most known for would be the more organic, kind of loosey-goosey kinds of shapes, like the seat here for his three-legged stools, and what I call a potato chippy seat, where this line kind of drifts up and down. And, he was always making, he made these mostly in the 60s, and he would do them in groups of 20 at a time. And a client would call up and say, I'd like to buy a stool. And he'd say, yeah, come over. But rather than showing them 20, he would take 2 out and put them down and say, which one do you want? As opposed to somebody spending 2 hours whittling it down to 5. He was just quick to the chase. So, but he was always, everyone was different. And so there are definitely winners and, some that aren't so good, because he was trying to keep it fresh every time. It's not like he took one particular shape or edge treatment. They all connect, they all relate, but there are definitely winners and losers. Another thing that he did was these carved bowls. This is my favorite of all that I've ever seen. Some of them are not quite as polished and finished. This has a line of definition that goes around the outer edge. It's fairly small, about 12 or 13 inches long. He would make enormous trays too. So those would be the three sort of styles, and this one would be the most, one that most people would associate with. When anthroposophy came to the U.S., its first organized location was in New York City, and it was called the Threefold Commonwealth Group. And so this is a commission Esherick had in 1931, and so this is, to me, just a clear play on that word, threefold. So if you look at this is a corner desk that he did for the Helene Fisher. It's got 3 parts to the top. The center part has 3 panels that fold open, so it's just sort of a play on that. I had the experience of seeing this the first year I started woodworking in 1972. It was at the Renwick Gallery at their inaugural exhibition called Wooden Works. I'll show you some pictures from that. And, when I saw this, I thought, you can do anything with wood. There are cascading verticals in here. I'm like, anything's possible. And it was, but not for most people, because it's tricky, this piece. But it was easy for this guy, John Schmidt. John Schmidt was a orphan from Hungary who he went through an apprenticeship program in what's now Serbia, and he moved to the U.S. at 16 years old and just happened to set up shop 2 miles from Esherick's house. And he was the guy. I mean, Esherick, there's this thing of the name, the person, whoever it is, Maloof or Nakashima, take the individual. They would design something and they would engineer it and probably make it once or twice or 3 times. And then the workers could do it because it's all laid out, right? that sort of thing. Well, Esherick didn't know how to make it. This guy did. He's the one who engineered the work, and I think that that's really, really significant. There were, I guess you would call them arguments between the two, because Esherick would just come in with a sketch, and it's like, here, make this. In fact, his son told me a story where Esherick came in and handed him a piece of paper and said, I don't know how you're going to make it, but you're going to make it. And you know, so he doesn't get a lot of credit for what he did, but Schmidt trained Esherick 2 miles away, showed him how to do woodworking. He engineered his work, and he built the furniture for 25 years. And you know, I'm not, you know, I mean, I'm not taking away from Esherick, as I'm giving credit to this guy. You know, I think Esherick did some amazing designs, but this part of it really has to be factored into it. And then when he moved out actually in 1956, John Schmidt moved to do work for somebody else. Esherick had his shop built. Louis Kahn designed the shop for him. When he was 68 years old, he got his shop. I think that's something. He did have some equipment. He had a bandsaw that John Schmidt made out of bicycle tires. And John Schmidt made the machines. He made the machines, you know. So this is the interior of that desk. I could give a whole talk about this desk. I got to see it. I took these pictures. It's in private hands in Maine. There's a panel, and this panel slides back, and underneath it is a tray that comes out, and behind that there's another tray, and these are those cascading verticals, and here are some drawers. This part right here pulls out and it turns on. It's a light, right? So it's an enclosed space. It's just a really, really interesting thing. Underneath there's a 5-sided dovetailed angled trash can. So that fits right, nests right into the back. And if you just crumble up a piece of paper and throw it underneath forward, it lands in there. You know, it can't miss. And up here, to Esherick's credit, it says JS for John Schmidt, and then Wharton Esherick in the date, 1931. That was the only credit given to Schmidt was the pieces that he made for this woman, Helene Fisher. That's Helene Fisher in her house in near Philadelphia, and that's the corner desk is on the right-hand side. These are some other commissions that he did for her. Sometimes combining things like the bench also has record storage. When the pivot drawers, when you pivot them out, the light goes on above them. These have all, well, that one is sold in auction. The upper left is a side table, and the lower left is a sewing cabinet. For the Hedgerow Theater, his daughter Ruth wanted to be part of the repertory theater, and Esherick didn't have the money to pay for it, so he made his now famous hammer-handled chairs, and Wendell Castle stated, great example of Yankee ingenuity, which I agree with. You know, these are some of the different designs. $15 for a book in 1928. These in the late 30s, he got credit for it. Initially, they were more expensive. They were $7.53, but he got that down to $5.50 for some of the later ones. They currently go for $10,000 to $20,000 at auction. This is for the Curtis Bock House. This is now permanent installation at the Philadelphia Museum of Art. There's an archway for that building as well, and you see this sort of draping effect, right? All carved, I think, oak. And on the right, you see an anthroposophical woodworker from 1925, 12 years earlier. And, you know, I think it's a pretty clear connection there of influence or inspiration. This is a studio built in 3 sections. The first one in 1926. It features a beautiful spiral staircase. This is a more recent shot. It's a museum that's open to the public. Fabulous. There's so much to see. It's just chock full of stuff. You see the staircase in the back. And it's through tenons bolted into that column that he carved, and it was part of the World's Fair in New York in 1939. This is Aileen Osborne Webb, who was a lot of times people talk about the post-World War II craft movement, and there's really something to that. But Esherick had 25 years in before that happened, and there were other people that are, part of that, and, this woman played a major role. She started all these different things, the School for American Craftsmen, initially at Dartmouth, World Craft Council, Museum of Contemporary Crafts in '56. Esherick would have his solo show in '58, so 2 years into that. The other thing was the GI Bill, which, you know, GIs came back, 16 million returning war veterans got a free college education. And I mean, this is a quote from Beverly Sanders, who wrote an article saying it turned the privilege of the elite into a middle-class entitlement. So I mentioned the Wooden Works exhibition before, and it had Nakashima, Maloof, Esherick, Art Carpenter. Art Carpenter and Maloof, clearly part of that GI Bill. Nakashima, in a very different way. He was in an internment camp, but came out as a woodworker and settled near where I live in New Hope, Pennsylvania. This is an installation shot of the Wooden Works. And in that show, it had Esherick's 1951 music stand. I can't say that it was actually that one, but you know, he designed it in '51. And then you had these three others that had made music stands. And it's a really significant piece because it took what's normally folded up and put in the closet and made it into a beautiful piece of furniture. Castles is my favorite of those, but Esherick was the first. I put this image of this book called Shaping America's Products because I read that Wendell Castle, when he was in college, saw this book, and this is what made him decide to go into furniture making. And the reason is that there were 2 pages on Esherick. And I contacted Castle about it, and he said, yeah, that's true, but I don't even remember what was in the book. So I took a picture of it and sent it to him. It had his spiral staircase and a latch on the right, and sort of a, you know, okay piece on the lower left. So I think that's kind of interesting. Esherick really promoted himself. This is a piece he had in the Whitney annual. It was an annual at the time in 1952, and he was also in the first Whitney biennial with a sculpture. Sandstone sculpture. This is a ladle. He made a bunch of these ladles. This is an earlier one, and it says, for Hannah to brew a stew for Wharton, 1931. It has this nice little shaped edge detail that just, it's one line that kind of goes around the whole thing. And this is a later one, much more loosey-goosey. He just bands all these things out. This is in Cocobolo, shape it, and then somebody invited him to dinner, and he'd give it as a present. I mentioned the solo retrospective he had at Museum of Contemporary Craft. Had over 100 pieces in it. This is an aerial view of a staircase he did for the Bock house. And playful stuff. He only had one grandchild, Dave Esherick, and he would give him a different animal for Christmas or birthday each year. And this is a hors d'oeuvre stand. It's a lion, obviously. It has underneath the mouth, there are holes drilled up and nails put in. They're the teeth. And it's all been sort of stained this color. And so the mane holds toothpicks, you know, for the hors d'oeuvres, and you can put pretzels on the tail. He tended to have, you know, people that would just commission him to make something, and then the next year, something else, the next year, something else. The Rubinsons had a huge collection, a complete house filled with furniture, and they also bought like the rest of the print runs of his prints. They had over 750, I think it is, prints of his, 20 of each. I mean, there were 400 different, so he'd buy multiples just to help him out. And that sideboard, I think that's a current high mark for his furniture. That sideboard sold for $360,000. That's him, probably in his last year. And I want to thank the Maloof Foundation for sponsoring this talk, and thank you very much.